My name is Nora Callahan, and I want you to picture this with me for just a moment. Picture a garden strung with fairy lights, the kind that make everything look softer than it really is. White linen tablecloths, champagne in tall flutes, veuve cliquot, because Diana had insisted on it, and Robert had written the check without blinking. Laughter drifting through the warm evening air like it belonged there. A rehearsal dinner for my daughter's wedding, held on the grounds of a small New England church in Woodstock, Vermont. 74 guests. 62 of them people who had sat in my kitchen, people whose children had grown up alongside mine. Now picture me, standing in the middle of all that beauty, in my navy midi dress and nude block heels I'd bought on sale because I couldn't afford the ones I'd wanted. My hands trembling so hard I had to set my champagne glass on the nearest table before I dropped it. And picture Diana. Cream Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress, smile just a little too fixed, chin just a little too high, voice carrying just far enough for the nearest 3 tables to hear her say the words she had no business saying. The garden went quiet in that particular way. Gardens go quiet when something ugly surfaces beneath something pretty. Not silent, just stilled. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. My daughter Lily, 26 years old, ivory silk rehearsal dress, the one we'd found together at a boutique in Burlington back in February, stood 3 feet away from me with a look on her face I had never seen before and hope I never see again. The look of a woman watching 2 halves of her life try to destroy each other in public. I did not cry. I have spent a long time learning the difference between moments that deserve tears and moments that deserve something harder, something quieter, something that stays. I looked at Diana. I looked at her for a long time. And then I did something she did not expect, because nothing in the previous 4 years had prepared her for the version of me standing in that garden. I smiled. Not the careful, managed smile I'd worn to every holiday, every birthday dinner, every awkward gathering where I was expected to be gracious and quietly grateful I was included at all. This was a different smile. The smile of a woman who has already burned down to the ground and learned, in the ash and the silence, exactly what she is built from. I'll tell you what happened next. I'll tell you all of it. But first, you need to understand how we got to that garden. Because none of it makes sense without the beginning. The beginning is the day I lost everything. Or the day I thought I lost everything, which at the time felt exactly the same. I had a husband. A house on a quiet street in Millbrook with a maple tree in the front yard that turned the most extraordinary color every October, the kind of deep burnt orange that made strangers slow their cars down to look at it. A daughter who was 11 and still crawled into my bed on Sunday mornings asking me to read to her even though she could read perfectly well herself. A life that wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine, and it was real, and it was the thing I had built with my own 2 hands. Robert and I had been struggling for years, in the slow, grinding way some marriages go wrong, not with screaming or cruelty or any single terrible moment. Just the accumulation of small distances, small silences, small moments of looking at each other across the kitchen and feeling like strangers who had signed a very long contract. I believed in trying anyway. I suggested counseling. Weekends away without Lily. Conversations that Robert sat through with the expression of a man waiting for a meeting to end. And then one Tuesday evening in March, the 14th, because I remember the utility bill sitting unopened on the counter. When Lily was at a sleepover and our split level on Hendrick Street was quiet, Robert sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me he had met someone. He didn't say he was sorry. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time, and that Diana made him feel something he'd forgotten he was capable of feeling. He said it the way people say things when they've rehearsed them. So many times the words have lost all their weight. I remember the kitchen in that moment. The particular yellow of the overhead light, the cheap builder-grade fixture we'd always meant to replace. The cabinet door on the left side of the sink that never hung quite straight. The $11 Walmart coffee mug in front of me, white, small chip on the handle, that I'd stopped drinking from but was still holding because I needed something to hold. I didn't know yet what this was going to cost me. I didn't know the house would sell for $340,000 and that my half after legal fees would leave me just enough for a security deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator. I didn't know how long the damage would take to travel, how far it would reach, how almost 4 years later it would follow me all the way to a garden strung with fairy lights, to a woman in a cream-wrap dress, telling everyone I knew that I didn't belong. I didn't know any of that yet. But here's what I need you to understand. That kitchen is where this story really begins. That overhead light, that $11 mug, that moment. Because what Diana didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing there in that garden with her chin raised and her smile fixed, was that I had spent 4 years walking back into that kitchen, piece by piece, until I understood every inch of what it had cost me and exactly what it had made me. She thought she was drawing a line in the sand. She had just handed me the ground to stand on. My name is Nora, and I needed to tell you about the accusation before I can tell you anything else. Because everything that happened in that garden, everything Diana said, and everything Lily's face did in the 3 seconds after she said it, traces back to a Tuesday morning in November, 7 months after Robert sat across from me in our kitchen, under that yellow overhead light, and told me about Diana. 7 months after the word divorce entered our house like weather, quiet and unavoidable, and reshaping everything it touched. I had been managing. That is the honest word for what I was doing. Not healing, not thriving. Managing. Getting Lily to school by 7:40 every morning, her lunchbox packed, her Thursday folder signed. Responding to Robert's lawyer's emails within 24 hours, the way my own lawyer, Patricia Haynes, had advised. Going to work at the small nonprofit where I had spent the last 6 years coordinating fundraising, sitting at my desk in the open plan office on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse on Clement Street, making phone calls, eating lunch at my keyboard, coming home to a house that felt too large for 2 people, but that I refused to leave because that maple tree in the front yard was going to turn orange in October, and I intended to be there when it did. I had been there. The tree had turned, exactly as I knew it would, and I had stood at the front window with a cup of coffee and watched it. And that had counted for something, even if I couldn't have explained to anyone what. I was the grants manager. I managed relationships with foundations, tracked restricted funds, wrote the reports that proved we had spent money the way we said we would. Detailed work, the kind that rewards people who do not let things slip. I had never let a single thing slip in 6 years, until everyone decided I had. It started with a discrepancy. That was the word used in the email from our executive director, Paul Whitmore, who had hired me 6 years earlier and who I had believed, until that Tuesday, understood the kind of worker I was. A discrepancy in the grant reconciliation for the Harmon Family Foundation account. $43,000 that could not be immediately accounted for in the documentation I had submitted. Paul's email was careful. It said discrepancy. It said we need to discuss. It said, please come see me this morning and bring any supporting files you have. I brought everything. My laptop, a 2-inch binder of printed disbursement records, a manila folder of original grant agreements going back to the prior fiscal year. I sat in Paul's office with its view of the parking structure next door, my files open on his conference table, and I walked him through every line item, every transfer, every allocation. I found the error within 20 minutes, except it was not my error. It was a data entry mistake made 8 months earlier by our bookkeeper, Cheryl, who had coded a restricted grant disbursement to the wrong program fund, typed 4720 where she should have typed 4270, a transposition of 2 digits in the middle of a 400-line spreadsheet. The $43,000 had never gone anywhere it shouldn't have. It was sitting exactly where it was supposed to be, in the Youth Workforce Development Fund, just mislabeled because of that single reversed number. I showed Paul the original grant agreement, the disbursement records, the corrected allocation. I showed him how the numbers resolved completely, how the Harmon account balanced to 0 variance, how every dollar was documented. He looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at me. And I saw something in his expression that did not shift the way it should have shifted once the explanation was right there on the table in front of him. He said, "Nora, I have to be honest with you." I asked him what concerns. He straightened one of the papers in front of him, even though it was already straight. He said someone on the team had come to him, had mentioned that I seemed distracted in recent months, that I had missed a detail in a foundation report back in September, something that required a correction letter, that at a staff meeting I had misquoted a budget figure, said $62,000 when the approved line item was $68,000, and had to be corrected by someone else in the room. These things had happened. September had been the month I signed our divorce papers in Patricia Haynes's conference room while wearing a gray blazer I had bought specifically because I wanted to look like a woman who was not falling apart. Yes, I had transposed 2 numbers in a quarterly narrative and sent a correction. That had never happened to me before in 6 years. I had been humiliated by it. I had also corrected it within 12 hours, written a careful letter on organization letterhead, followed up with the Foundation's program officer personally by phone. But someone had been collecting these moments, keeping a list, building a picture. I didn't know who until 2 days later, when Patricia called with information from a source she wouldn't name, and I learned that the person who had gone to Paul, who had volunteered the narrative of a woman losing her grip, was my colleague Marcus Tillman. Marcus, who sat 3 desks away from me in the open plan office, whose desk faced mine across a narrow corridor of gray carpet tiles. Marcus, who had covered my caseload for 3 weeks in July while I was navigating a particularly brutal stretch of the divorce proceedings, and who had complained about that coverage loudly enough that I'd heard him tell our 24-year-old development associate that he had not been hired to do someone else's job. Marcus, who had applied for my position 2 years before I was hired, and who, according to Patricia's source, had recently asked Paul whether there might be room for restructuring the grants team, whether a combined grants and development director role might make sense given the organization's growth. I went back to Paul with what I knew. I put it on the table the same way I had put the financial documentation on the table. I was clear. I was calm. I had learned by then, in the way that divorce teaches you things you did not sign up to learn, how to be very calm while something inside you is splitting. Paul listened. He thanked me for bringing it to him. He said the financial matter appeared to be resolved, and he appreciated my thoroughness. And then he told me he was placing me on administrative leave while the organization conducted a formal review. Full pay, he said, as though that were the part that mattered. He said my keycard access would be suspended in the interim. He said this with the careful tone of a man who had decided long ago that evenness was the same thing as fairness. I walked out of that office, down the hallway with its motivational posters and its program photos. Kids in hard hats on job site tours, teenagers holding certificates, out through the glass front door, and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for a long time before I remembered how to move my feet. By the time I reached my car, 3 of my closest colleagues had sent texts that all said some version of the same thing. Careful, hedging, the kind of language people use when they want to seem supportive without actually taking a side. One was from Joelle, my closest friend at that organization for 4 years. The woman who had ordered a cake from the bakery on 4th Street with my name in blue frostings, who had sat with me in the parking structure in August and let me cry about the divorce for 45 minutes with the engine running because it was too hot to sit with it off. Her message said, "I'm so sorry you're going through this. I hope it all gets sorted out. I think it's best if I give you some space while the review is happening." I read it 3 times. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the place I had given 6 years of my life to, and I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat, on top of the 2-inch binder I had carried in that morning, believing it would be enough. I called Robert, because I did not know who else to call. Because somewhere beneath everything that had broken between us, I still believed he knew me well enough to know the truth. He listened. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said the words I was not prepared for. The words that closed something in me that had still, despite everything, been left a little open. I said, "The numbers were right, Robert." He said he was sure they were. He said it, "The way you say something when you've already decided the answer doesn't belong to you anymore." That was the moment I understood what I was actually facing. Not a financial discrepancy that had been resolved inside 20 minutes. What I was facing was a version of myself that other people had been quietly constructing without me. A woman coming apart at the seams, making mistakes, needing to be managed. Marcus had built it. Paul had found it convenient. Joelle had declined to contradict it. And Robert had just confirmed it, in that careful, sorry voice, the same voice I now realized he had been using with me for months. The voice of a man who had already made his decision about who I was. I wasn't just going to have to prove the numbers. I was going to have to prove myself to every person who had found it easier to believe I was breaking than to ask whether someone had taken a knife to the seams. I just didn't know yet what proving it was going to cost. The review took 6 weeks. I know because I count them the way you count things when time has lost its shape, not by what happened, but by how many Sunday nights I sat at my kitchen table after Lily was asleep, going through the same documentation again, writing the same notes to Patricia Haynes in emails sent at 10:30 and 11 and sometimes past midnight. Cold coffee leaving rings on folders I had printed, and color tabbed myself because I needed to do something with my hands. 6 weeks. And then Paul called, not to tell me I was cleared. He called to tell me that while no financial misconduct had been found, they had identified a pattern of performance concerns that predated the leave period, and that it was in the best interest of the organization to restructure the grants team going forward. He used that phrase, best interest of the organization, the way people use language when they want to say something without being the person who said it. I asked him directly, "Paul, am I being let go?" "We're eliminating the position, Nora. 6 years of grants work. 6 years of foundation relationships built from nothing. 42 consecutive quarters of restricted fund reports with a single compliance flag, until one bookkeeper typed 5844 instead of 5408 on a disbursement line. It ended on a phone call that lasted 11 minutes while I stood at my kitchen sink with the water still running. Because I had been washing a mug when my phone rang, and I hadn't thought to turn the tap off. Marcus was named interim grants manager 4 days later. I filed for wrong termination through employment attorney Patricia connected me to a woman named Deborah Wu. 2-room office on the 14th floor of a building where the elevator was slow and the waiting area chairs were from 3 different non-matching sets. The case had merit, she said, but it would take time and money. And the most likely outcome was a modest severance, $8,000 to $12,000, and a neutral reference, no public acknowledgement. I said I understood. I did not understand the part where $8,000 to $12,000 and a neutral reference meant Marcus Tillman would continue sitting 3 desks from where mine used to be, doing work I had built, and no one who mattered would ever be required to say his name in relation to what happened to me. I was 34. I had a 7-year-old daughter, 8 months out from a divorce, and $412 in my checking account with a lease renewal due in February. The isolation had its own texture. Losing a job strips away a layer of daily human contact you didn't realize you were depending on until it's simply gone. No calls to make. No meetings. No small conversations at the coffee machine that were never really about coffee. The structure disappeared, and underneath it was quiet in a way that was not peaceful. I started noticing things I'd never had time to notice. The refrigerator humming slight off, rhythm. The upstairs neighbor's dog pacing the same oval at 2 in the afternoon. The kitchen light going flat and gray by 3 o'clock in November. E applied for every grants position within 40 miles. Worked through the list the same way I had once worked through a portfolio of 37 restricted funds. 3 interviews in 4 months. In 2 of them I could feel the exact moment the conversation shifted. A slight cooling, a glance held half a second too long. A question about my previous role framed just carefully enough to signal that whatever reference check had come back careful rather than warm. The third, with a community development nonprofit in Eastbrook. Made it to a second interview in a conference room with a framed mission statement and a bowl of wrapped peppermints. And then a phone call saying they had decided to go in a different direction. Patricia said, "These things take time." Everyone said these things take time. What they meant was that I needed to wait for the version of events Marcus had seeded to slowly lose its shape. He started shopping at the discount grocery on Fletcher Street, store brand everything. I started checking Lily's sneakers to see how much growing room she had left. Lily asked me once why I was home all the time now. Wednesday morning, eating cereal before school. The Cheerios, not the kind she liked, because the kind she liked was $5.49 a box. "I'm between jobs right now, Bug." She nodded. "Is it because of the divorce?" She was quiet a moment, then, "Dad says things are changing." I asked her what things. She looked at her bowl. "He didn't say exactly, just things." Robert had been saying things were changing for weeks in the careful, elliptical way he had started communicating with me since the divorce. Never direct, never specific, always leaving me to work out the edges. I had learned to watch the contours of what he did not say. He had a new car I'd noticed when he picked Lily up on Thursdays, a dark green Audi. Current model year. The kind of car you buy when something in your life has recently confirmed itself. What he had not said, specifically, was that he was getting remarried. I found out from Lily on a Friday afternoon in March. Delivered with the matter-of-fact calm of a 7-year-old who had been sitting on news longer than she should have had to. "Dad and Diana are getting married in June. I'm going to be a flower girl." She said it plainly. But she was watching my face the way children watch when they already know the answer matters. I was folding laundry on the edge of her bed, a small pile, because I'd started doing smaller loads to save on the electric bill. I looked at my hands for a moment before I trusted my voice. "That's a big thing, Bug. How do you feel about it?" She thought about it seriously. "I feel like it's a lot of things at once." I told her that was exact the right way to feel about it. I did not tell her what I felt. I did not tell her that some part of me had spent 18 months this story was still unfinished, and that hearing Diana's name out loud was not the ending, but the proof that I had been waiting for one. That was the bottom. Lily's cereal bowl, the quiet house, the small pile of laundry. A name said out loud in a room that used to be ours, 3 months behind on what I'd promised I'd save before the lease came up. What I had not known, until I started paying attention the way you pay attention when you have nothing left to protect, was that Diana Reeves had her own grant portfolio. A private family foundation, the Reeves Callaway Fund, that had been distributing roughly $400,000 a year to regional nonprofits for the past 6 years. He had never crossed paths with it professionally. It was small, quietly run. The kind of operation that stays beneath the surface of the sector until you know what to look for. E knew what to look for. 2 of the fund's listed grant recipients appeared in the same regional directory I had been combing for job leads. Standard entries, mission statement, staff size, annual budget, but the budget figures were wrong. Not obviously wrong. The kind of wrong that only reads as wrong if you have spent 6 years learn how restricted funds move and where the pressure points are. One organization was report program expenses that exceeded their total revenue for the same fiscal year by a margin too clean to be accounting error. The other had received 3 consecutive grants from the Reeves Callaway Fund. Each one timed precisely enough to cover a gap that should not have existed in a healthy operation. He was not looking for this. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for a job. I was cross-referencing funders to find warm contacts, and I happened to be good enough at my work to see what was there. I sat with it for 4 days before I let myself think about what it meant. It meant Diana Reeves, who was marrying my ex-husband in June, and who Lily was going to walk down an aisle for wearing a dress I had not been insulted about, had a problem, a real one. The kind that does not stay buried when someone with the right training starts asking the right questions. I was not yet sure what I was going to do with that. But I was sure for the first time in 6 months that I was not waiting anymore. I did not sleep that night, not really. I lay in the dark with Lily's soft breathing carrying through the wall. She always slept with her door cracked 3 inches. A habit from when she was 4 and afraid of the furnace. And I ran back through everything I knew, everything I had been told. Everything that had happened since Robert and Diana's engagement had arrived in my life like weather. I had not been warned about Diana Marsh. 31 years old, commercial real estate, had known Robert through a mutual friend for 2 years before they started dating, which meant if I did the arithmetic the way, I could not stop myself from doing it, that they had known each other while Robert and I were still trying. While we were still in the room together, pretending the walls were not coming down. I had filed that in the part of myself where I put things that were true but not useful. What was useful was something smaller. A single detail that had been sitting at the edge of my memory since the night of the rehearsal dinner. The night Diana had said what she said to Lily. The night I had stood on that fairy-lit lawn and felt the ground beneath my careful shoes become something I could not trust. There had been a woman at the end of the table. I had noticed her the way you notice someone who is being careful about how much they are noticed. Not loud, not close to the center of things, but watching, older than most of the guests, maybe 60. Streaked hair pulled back without apology. Holding her wine glass, always by the stem with 2 fingers and a steadiness that looked practiced, like someone who had attended a great number of events she did not particularly want to attend. At some point, somewhere between the bruschetta course and whatever followed it, I had seen Diana lean past 3 people to say something to her that changed the expression on both their faces. I had not thought much of it then. I had been too occupied with Lily, with the cold, careful space Diana had carved between my daughter and that front row of white chairs. But I thought of her now. I thought of the way she had gone still when Diana spoke to her, and still is different from calm. Still can mean you are absorbing something that requires absorption. I did not know her name, but I knew someone who would. Carol Hennessy had been Robert's family's neighbor for 20 years, the same cream-painted colonial on Aldridge Street. The window boxes she replanted every May, and had attended every significant event in Robert's life with the cheerful, all-knowing presence of someone who felt that watching a person grow up entitled her to a complete accounting of his choices. She was one of perhaps 4 people in the entire geography of my former marriage who had continued to call me by my name after the papers were signed. He called her at 8 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring. Nora, he was wondering when you'd call. Carol, the woman at the rehearsal dinner, silver hair, sat near Diana's mother. Who is she? Carol was quiet for exactly long enough to tell me the answer was not simple. That's Vera Calloway, Diana's aunt on her father's side. They've had a complicated relationship. I asked what kind of complicated. The kind that involves money. Diana's father passed about 3 years ago. There was some question about the estate, a lake house up near Harwick, and whatever was left of his import business. I don't know all of it. A pause. Why are you asking about Vera? I told her what had happened at the recital. I told her what Diana had said to Lily. Said about Lily, with that measured quiet that had been worse than shouting because it had been designed to land without a witness. I told her about Lily's face and the empty seat, and the way my daughter had looked at me afterward like she was trying to work out what she had done wrong. Lily, who had practiced her 3-minute piece for 6 weeks, who had kept the program rolled inside her cardigan pocket all morning like a good luck charm. He told her that Robert had been there and had not said a word in either direction. Carol was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was lower, waited. Nora, I need to tell you something. Vera reached out to Margaret about 2 months ago, sometime in September. She said Diana had been pushing Robert to consolidate, to bring Lily into the new family picture in a way that reduced your involvement. Vera said she had tried to talk to Diana about it, and Diana had told her that her relationship with her aunt was her own business. Another pause. Vera said it felt like there was something Diana needed Lily to be, some kind of proof. She said it felt like Diana was trying to make Lily the daughter she could not have on her own. I set my hand flat on the kitchen table. The laminate was cold. The December light through the window above the sink was the flat white kind that gives nothing back. Can have, I said. Or does not have yet. Vera's word was cannot. She didn't say more than that. I sat with that. I sat with what it meant that Diana had looked at my daughter, my 7-year-old with her bouquet of white flowers and her careful hope face, and seen not a child to be kind to, but a vacancy to be filled. Not a person. A proof of something she needed the world to believe about her. And I understood then that Vera Calloway had not been attending that rehearsal dinner the way the rest of the guests had. She had not come for the fairy lights or the toast raised in crystal Robert had probably picked out with Diana on a Saturday in October. She had been waiting for the exact moment she had seen. The way she had gone still when Diana leaned past those three people to speak to her. Not the stillness of surprise, I understood now, but the stillness of confirmation. She had already known what Diana was. She had only needed to watch her perform it in public, in front of witnesses, in a way that could not later be softened into understanding. Before E hung up, I asked Carol one more thing. Whether Vera still had any standing, legally, practically, in any way that counted, with respect to Diana and whatever had not been settled after Diana's father died. Carol said she thought so. She said she thought that was rather the point. Then she said, "Nora, before you do anything, you should know that Vera called me last week. She left her number. She said if anyone from Robert's side ever asked about her, I should pass it along. A beat. She said she'd been waiting for someone to ask." I wrote the number down on the back of Lily's recital program, the one I had taken from the piano bench that night and had not yet found a reason to throw away. He needed to find a reason to call it. But something told me that when Diane had leaned across that table to look into her aunt's face, she had handed that woman exactly the weapon she had been waiting for and had not even noticed her fingers open. And something else told me that Vera Calloway had not left her number with Carol Hennessy on the off chance that no one would ever think to ask. She had left it because she had known, before I did, that I would need it. I found Vera Calloway's number through Carol, who read it to me slowly over the phone the way she read everything, as though the information itself required a certain ceremony to be transferred correctly. I wrote it down on the back of Stop and Shop receipt: milk, Lily's strawberry yogurt pouches, the good bread she liked, because it was the only paper I had within reach, and I looked at it for a long time before he did anything with it. I gave mice until noon. I would take the morning to be a mother first, make Lily's lunch, drive her to school, stand at the drop, off curb at Elmore Elementary and wave until the door closed behind her. Then I would come home and sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and the receipt and decide what kind of woman I was going to be about this. Lily had been quiet that morning, not sad exactly, just inward. She ate her toast and looked out the window at the backyard where the bird feeder, the green plastic one Robert had hung on the maple branch 4 Christmases ago, back when we were still the kind of family that did things like that together, needed refilling. When I asked what she was thinking about, she said, "Nothing, just stuff." The answer 7-year-olds give when they're thinking about something they don't yet have the words for. I didn't push. He refilled her Minnie Mouse water bottle, found her left shoe under the couch, told her she looked beautiful in her purple sweater. And I held all the rest of it in the part of mice I had gotten very good at holding things. On the drive back from school, I passed the church, the white clapboard one on Aldrich Road with the black shutters and the narrow gravel path, where in 4 days Robert and Diana were going to stand at an altar and make promises to each other, where there would be a front row of chairs and a guest book and a reception with fairy lights. And Lily would be there in some dress Diana had probably already selected from the Pottery Barn Kids catalog, and I would not be there at all. I drove past without stopping, but I looked. The way you look at something that has been trying to tell you something for a long time, and you have only just learned the language. He called Vera at 12:04, 4 minutes past the rule I had made, which felt like its own kind of answer. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and when I said my name and told her I was Lily's mother and that Carol Hennessy had given me her number, there was a pause on the other end that was not surprise. It was the pause of someone who has been expecting a specific knock on a specific door and is taking one breath before they open it. "I wondered if you would call before Saturday," she said. "I need to understand what you saw at the rehearsal dinner." "Yes," she said. "I think you do." And then Vera Calloway, who I had never met, who had sat at the far end of a fairy-lit table at the Aldrich Inn and gone still in the particular way, that meant she was absorbing something that required it, told me what she had spent 2 months trying to figure out how to say to someone who needed to hear it. She told me that Diana had been directing Lily all evening, not unkindly, not in any way that looked unkind from the outside, but directing, the way a person directs something they feel ownership over. Positioning Lily next to Robert in photographs. Straightening the white spray roses Lily carried, speaking to Lily in a low, careful voice that did not carry across the table. She told me she had watched Diana's face when I walked in. There was something that shifted in her when you arrived, Nora. Something that got smaller and harder at the same time. Then she told me about the seat. She had been 3 chairs down, close enough. When Lily had asked to sit with the family, and Diana had said what she said about real daughters. Vera had set down her wine glass on the white tablecloth and looked at her niece and felt something she had been trying not to feel for the better part of a year settle into a certainty. I asked if she would be willing to say that to someone other than me. She was quiet, the kind of quiet that is not refusal. I love my niece. Nora, I want you to understand that first. I have watched Diana build walls in places where she should have built doors her whole life. And I have tried to understand it. But what she said to your daughter is something a child carries the way a child carries a scar, not in her hands. Not somewhere she can set down when she is ready, in her bones. And you do not put something into a child's bones without accepting that it will shape the way she stands for the rest of her life. That is not something I can watch happen and say nothing about. I'm not asking you to be against her, I said. I'm asking you to be for Lily. I know, she said. That's why I'm still on the phone. Then, there is one other thing. She said it the way people say things they have been holding at arm's length, and I heard the shift in her voice, something bracing itself. At the end of the evening, when coats were going on and tables being cleared, she had watched Diana take Lily's hand and walk her toward the door. Had heard her say, quietly, in that same low, careful voice, that Lily was going to be the most important person at the wedding. That it would be just the 3 of them now. That this was how their family was going to be. Not a family Lily was joining. A family Lily was being assigned to. One that had already decided what she was. Lily had looked up at Diana with an expression Vera recognized. That was the part, she said, that had kept her awake. It was the expression of a child who wants very badly believes something and is already. Somewhere underneath the wanting, not sure that she can. I wrote down everything Vera told me. Not on the Stop and Shop receipt, which had run out of room somewhere between the wine glass and the white tablecloth. But on 3 pages of the yellow legal pad I kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery list and Lily's Wednesday spelling words, blue Bic. The cheap ones. I read it back and let it sit in front of me until it stopped feeling like something I had stumbled into and started feeling like something understood. Diana had not been careless at the rehearsal dinner. She had not been thoughtless or tired or having a difficult evening. She had done something deliberate and small and designed not to be seen, and she had miscalculated in only one direction. She had not accounted for the woman at the far end of the table, who had been watching her long enough to know exactly what deliberate looked like when it wore a careful face. 3 pages of notes, Carol, Vera, and Lily's face, which I did not need written down because it had not left me since the moment I saw it. He looked at the legal pad, and the November light coming through the window over the sink, and the green plastic bird feeder that still needed refilling. I thought about it for a moment, about how it had been hanging there since the Christmas Robert put it up, how I had refilled it every winter since. How's Lily some stood at this same window and named the birds she recognized and invented names for the ones she didn't. I got up. Found the bag of Brack oil sunflower seeds in the cabinet above the refrigerator where I had always kept it, and went outside in my socks and filled it. Then I came back inside and sat down. I had been gathering without knowing I was gathering. And now I had enough. I was done being the woman who absorbs in silence what should be spoken out loud. The sentence had been forming for 6 weeks. One fact at a time, and now it was complete, and it had my daughter's name in it. I picked up my phone and typed the name in the search bar I had been avoiding for 6 weeks. Robert Calloway, attorney, custody modification, Massachusetts. My thumb hovered over the first result. I pressed it. I did not call Robert first. That was a choice I made deliberately. I had spent enough time in the posture of someone who waits to be invited in her own life. And I was not going to begin this by asking his permission to speak. I called Diana. I had her number because Robert had added to the shared calendar app, the one we both used to log Lily's pickups and drop-offs. The orthodontist appointments. The Thursday swim lessons at the Maplewood E. Back in the days when we were still trying to demonstrate to each other that we were capable of being reasonable adults about all of this. I had never used it. I had typed out 3 messages to it in the past year and deleted all 3 before sending them. E dialed at 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily would be in art class, the one where she came home every Wednesday with blue paint in the crease of her left thumb. I knew her schedule the way I knew my own breathing. Deanna picked up on the second ring. She said, "Nora." Just that. My name, flat and complete. "The way you say a word when you have been rehearsing its arrival." I said, "I think we need to talk before Saturday." She said, "I agree, actually." That surprised me. I had prepared for resistance. I noticed the small instinct to soften, to meet her there in the agreeing and let that be enough. I noticed it, and I let it pass. I said, "I want to talk about what was said to Lily at the rehearsal dinner." She said, "That was a difficult evening for everyone. I think things got miscommunicated." I said, "I don't think it was a miscommunication, Diana." She said, "Lily is sensitive. I love that about her. But she sometimes takes things in ways that weren't intended." I had 3 pages of notes on a yellow legal pad, Vera's words organized by sequence, by detail, by the specific and careful language of a woman who had been paying attention. I had Carol, who had seen my daughter's face under the parking lot lights of the Harborview Ballroom, and known what it meant. I had all of it in front of me on the kitchen table next to a cold cup of coffee I had stopped tasting an hour ago. He said, "Vera was there." The pause that followed was shorter and sharper than anything before it. The pause of someone who has just been handed something they did not expect to be in the room. She said, "Vera doesn't understand the dynamic between Lily and me. She doesn't see the whole picture," I said. "She was close enough to hear exactly what you said. She told me the words, Diana, not a version of them, not an impression of them, the words." He did not raise my voice. I had spent enough of the past 18 months in the posture of someone who raises her voice and gets called unstable for it. I had learned the difference between volume and clarity was what I had. I said, "That seat is only for real daughters." The silence that followed was different from any of the pauses before it. It did not soften at the edges the way memory does. Spoken aloud, in the flat October light with the legal pad in front of me, it had no edges at all, only weight. The precise and total weight of a thing that exactly what it is. Deanna said, "She wasn't supposed to hear it like that." I said, "How was she supposed to hear it?" She did not answer that. I said, "She's 7, Diana. She asked to sit with her father's family because she loves her father and she wants to be near him, and she was carrying a basket of white ranunculus she had practiced holding for 2 weeks without dropping a single one. And what she heard was that she was not real enough." A silence came through the line that I could not entirely name. Not crying. Something before crying. Something in the space before a person decides whether they are going to let them feel what they are feeling or whether they are going to build something around it instead. I said, "I'm not calling to take something from you. I'm not calling to make Saturday smaller. I am calling because my daughter is going to be at that wedding, and she is going to sit in a chair next to her father, and she is going to believe that she belongs there. And I need to know from you directly that she is safe to believe that." Diana said, "I never meant to hurt her." I said, "I know that. And I also need you to understand that at 7 years old, Lily cannot tell the difference between what you meant and what she felt. She only knows what she carries home." A silence. Outside my kitchen window, the bird feeder hung empty, the $40 cedar one Robert had left behind. The one I had never bothered to refill out of some stubbornness I was only now beginning to recognize as grief, and 2 sparrows had landed on the wire above it and were waiting in that patient, small-bodied way birds wait for things. Diana said quietly, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want you to tell her, not me, her. I want you to sit down with Lily before Saturday and tell her that what she heard was wrong and that you were wrong and that she is real and she belongs and she is wanted there." I said, "That's all I want." Diana was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Okay." Not the okay of someone who has been defeated. The okay of someone who has finally stopped deciding. I said, "Thank you." I meant it without warmth and without coldness. I meant it the way you mean a thing when the meaning is the only part left. After E hung up, I did not move, the legal pad still in front of me. The coffee still cold. outside, the two sparrows still on the wire. Then my phone lit up. Robert, he looked at the screen for 3 full rings. I thought about what he might have heard already, what Diana might have said in the minutes since I'd hung up. How he would want to be the one to manage this now, to be let into the room and handed the shape of it. I let it go to voicemail. I had said what needed to be said. I had said it to the right person. Lily would have her answer before Saturday. And it would come from the mouth it needed to come from, not relayed, not softened, not passed through Robert's version of what was reasonable. Some things do not need a second voice to confirm them. Some things only need one person willing to say them plainly, in a quiet kitchen, on a Tuesday afternoon. And then the patience to let the silence that follows tell you whether they have finally landed somewhere they can stay. I did not know when I hung up the phone whether Diana would do it. He sat with the legal pad in front of me, 3 pages of notes I had made and not used. The handwriting getting smaller and more controlled toward the bottom, the way mine does when I am trying not to feel something. And the sparrows still on the wire outside, and the empty bird feeder, and the particular stillness of a Tuesday afternoon that has held something significant and is now simply continuing to be an afternoon. He understood somewhere in the steadier part of myself that I had done what I could do, that the rest of it was not mine to carry. There's a specific of peace in that, not warm and uncomplicated the way movies describe it. More like the moment after you have set down something very heavy, your hands still curved from holding it, your arms still remembering the weight, your body recalibrating to what it means to be without that particular burden, not empty, not relieved exactly. Just lighter in a way that takes a moment to understand. I refilled the bird feeder. I went out in the backyard and filled it from the $14 bag of black oil sunflower seed I kept in the garage. And the sparrows flew off when the door opened and came back almost immediately, the way sparrows do, as if they had made a brief calculation about risk and decided it was manageable. The late October light came in low and caught everything at a different angle than it had at noon. And the yard looked like itself and also like a painting of itself at the same time. I thought about Lily. I thought about her at the recital, 11 days ago, though the timeline felt much longer, the way she had moved through her piece, careful, concentrated, beautiful, in the particular way that 7-year-olds are beautiful when they are doing something with their whole self. I thought about the look on her face before the question she had not known yet was dangerous. I thought about the look on her face after. I had spent too long being the person who absorbs the after, who takes it home, processes it alone, files it somewhere manageable. I was not going to stop protecting Lily from things she was too young to carry. That was part of the job, and I would do it without resentment. But I was done being the person who absorbs things on behalf of other people's comfort. Done smoothing the silence over so no one has to stand in it. Done being quiet in the ways that cost me something real, while costing the people who caused it nothing at all. Robert called the following morning. 8:14. I noticed because Lily's bus came at 8:20 and I was still at the kitchen counter in yesterday's cardigan. His tone was not what I expected, not the careful flatness he used when he was managing a situation. He sounded like someone who'd been awake for a while. He said, "Diana told me about your conversation." I said, "Okay." He said, "She was upset." Not at you, at herself, a pause. "She talked to Lily this morning. Lily cried. Diana cried. It was..." He stopped, working for the right word and not find it. "It was hard, and I think it needed to happen." I said, "Yes." He said, "Nora, I should have done this myself. I should have done it before you had to." That was a true thing. Hearing him say it plainly did not fix what the not doing had cost. The 2 months of careful maneuvering, the phone calls rehearsed in the car, the Tuesday afternoon on the legal pad, but it was still worth something. I had learned to let things be worth something without demanding they be worth everything. He said, "Yes, you should have. But right now I just want to know if Lily is okay." He said, "She asked if she could wear her pink dress on Saturday." I almost smiled. The pink dress, cotton eyelet from Target, size 6X, with a sash she insisted on tying hers, was what Lily wore 2 occasions she had privately decided were significant. It meant she had determined Saturday was worth arriving for fully, that she had decided on her own, that she belonged there. I said, "Tell her yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Thank you, Nora, for making the call you made." I held that the way I have learned to hold things that are true and complicated at the same time, not dismissing it, not inflating it into more than it was. I said, "Take care of her on Saturday." He said, "I will." There are things I have set down since then that I am not sure I will ever pick back up. My willingness to disappear in the background of my own daughter's life so that other people can feel more comfortable in theirs. My habit of editing before I have finished thinking the thought. My belief, carried quietly for longer than I realized, that keeping the peace was the same thing as making it. Keeping the peace and making it are not the same thing. One is a silence you maintain, the other is a ground you build. I know the difference now, not as a sentence, but as an understanding that lives somewhere in my body and does not require reminding. Lily sat next to her father at the wedding on Saturday. She wore the pink dress. She held her small bouquet, 3 white dahlias, which she had asked to carry hers, with both hands and watched the ceremony with the complete and open attention she gives to things she has decided are worth her full presence. The sash was tied in a slight uneven bow, the way she always tied it, and she had not let anyone straighten it. At one point she looked over at me, across the aisle, and she smiled. It was the same face she had made at the recital, open, present, certain of herself. Not the face she had worn after the question, the other one, the one I had been working. Across 11 days and 3 pages of notes and 1 very difficult phone call to give back to her, that was the payoff. Not Robert's acknowledgement, though I had needed to hear it. Not the peace I had felt in the backyard with the sparrows and the low October light, though that had been real. This, my daughter in her pink dress with her uneven bow, looking across the aisle at me with her whole face open. Because she had decided she belonged here, and no one had taken that from her. My name is Nora. I am 34 years old. And I have a daughter who wore a pink dress because she decided she belonged somewhere, and she was right. That is not a small thing. I am learning to stop treat it like one. I have spent too much of my life making mice easier to overlook. I am done with that now. If you are the person who absorbs everything in silence because you believe it keeps things together, I want you to ask yourself something. Not what it cost you in the moments you can see, what it cost you in the quiet, where no one is watching and you are still paying. Because the quiet is not neutral, it has a price, and you are allowed to stop paying it alone.